Hello and welcome to Conversations with the Voice of Reason. I'm your host, Benjamin Boyce, and today's conversant is Nathan Cofnas, who is a research fellow at Cambridge University. We set up a conversation to speak about his views on hereditarianism or race realism, and over the course of the week between us setting up this interview and conducting this interview, he has been embroiled for these very same views, and he's now being, if you get the reference, Weinsteined, not Harvey, but Brett Weinstein, by not only the students of Cambridge, but also the faculty, the institution itself. And so his story is actually developing, but because of the nature of that story, we do not get into that. So you can expect to see more from and about him in the coming days and weeks as he is persecuted for looking at and speaking to demographic differences, which for one reason or another disturb and perturb the present morality enshrined in the institutions of the West, especially colleges. In this conversation, we talk about morality, biology, and hereditarianism, or race realism. And his ideas are interesting to me. I don't necessarily enshrine them all because I don't really understand this that much, but I got a little bit closer to understanding it while speaking with Nathan, whose Substack and Twitter will be linked in the description. And if you enjoy my content, consider liking, subscribing, and donating via the tip jars below. Without further ado, here is Nathan Cofnas. What is your doctorate about or in?
Philosophy from Oxford.
And what branch of philosophy, or is Oxford a doctor of philosophy in Oxford like a very broad, chunky
Well,
kind of
the
master?
Faculty of Philosophy awards PhDs, or what they call them DPhils, is the convention to abbreviate
Hmm.
it in the English way. And it's a very diverse department. People doing all kinds of research in different areas of philosophy and philosophy of physics, and there's a
Hmm.
lot of ethics, moral psychology, epistemology, everything.
Yeah.
And my thesis was on the evolution of uh, morality and the implications for metaethics. So the nature of morality and moral obligation.
Is
And,
that, yeah, I'm sorry,
uh,
continue.
and my main identity is a philosopher of biology. So I'm interested
Okay.
in evolutionary theory and its implications for science and philosophy.
That was going to be my question. Is the evolution of morality a discursive or a biological, or is there a distinction that needs to be made or can't be made between those two
Well,
domains?
there's a question of if our moral intuitions could be attributed to natural selection. Let's say we believe that it's a moral, it's it's meritorious to take care of your children, or to repay a debt, or to cooperate. And these are uh, on the face of it, these seem like beliefs that are adaptive and could have been favored by natural selection. Now, if that's the case, would that undermine the beliefs in some way? At least, would it suggest that they don't have some objective reality, that they're just a figment of our minds? Maybe
Yeah.
evolution could have been different, and then we would have completely different moral intuitions. So, what are the implications for how we understand our moral beliefs, and should we potentially abandon them? So there's a lot of debate about this. Like, are
And
our moral
the
beliefs
the debate is scary too because that has very powerful implications on law, on behavior, on rule, on power, right?
if people really understood the implications, then they would be very far-reaching. But this is a general fact about philosophy, which was observed by David Hume, that the kind of metaphysical speculations for most people don't really affect their day-to-day life. They say in the abstract, yeah, morality, it's a myth, or it's not really objectively real. But then they go back to acting as they were before.
Yeah.
So it's one thing to understand this intellectually and another thing to put it into practice.
Yeah. Okay. When you say objective morality or the questions of objective, if it is evolved, then it would be rather subjective, or at least not objective in the sense of universal, but rather particular and concrete and owing
Well,
to
natural
circumstance.
selection sometimes endows us with true beliefs, or we think. Natural selection gives us eyes to see objects around us, which gives us pretty good idea of what's going on. We believe we have beliefs about mathematics, which sort of intuitively we understand that 2 + 2 = 4, leaving aside some people on Twitter. Uh, I don't know if you followed the big, there's a big controversy about whether 2 + 2 can equal 5 or does it equal 4 on Twitter.
Yeah, controversy is kind of doing a lot of work there, but yeah, I've seen it.
Well, there were some very credentialed
Well,
mathematicians who
credentialed
were
is doing a
into.
lot of work too, to
Yeah,
be
yes.
fair.
Okay, that's true. But so leaving that aside,
Yeah.
we normally think that we have access to mathematical truths. And even the 2 + 2 = 5 people were saying that they know the truth about mathematics. And our capacity to recognize those truths uh, are the product of evolution by natural selection. Natural selection gives us the ability to understand logic. Now, how exactly we do this is a
Mm.
mysterious phenomenon, but it happened some way or other. Natural selection gave us the ability to understand uh, math and also to make observations about the empirical world. We think that science has taught us something true about the empirical world. Now, so the mere fact that evolution played a role, natural selection played some role in making it possible for us to have moral beliefs or causing us to have moral beliefs is not per se debunking. That doesn't uh, undermine our moral beliefs merely because natural selection played some role in creating them. The question is, what kind of role did natural selection play? And then, in light of that, the role that natural selection played, and given what we think morality is supposed to be, is there a contradiction? Is there some kind of tension between the fact of natural selection and our understanding of morality? So now, if you think that ethics just refers to, some people would say that, well, ethics is just the conventions of a community.
Mm.
Now, if that's what you think ethics is, it's kind of irrelevant where our moral intuitions came from, because they could have come from socialization or from natural selection. Who cares? It would be an interesting scientific fact to say where they came from, but ethics is just the systematization of all of these intuitions or conventions, and
Conventions.
that doesn't that concept of morality is not threatened by the supposed fact of natural selection. But let's say you think that ethics are like mathematical truths. So when I say that I should repay a debt, I borrowed money, the time comes to pay it back, and the ethical thing to do is to pay it back, assuming I have the money and there's no other complication. And you think this is a truth of logic. It's independent, even if everyone in the world had different intuitions, everyone in the world agreed that it's okay to borrow and not pay back. Even if no people ever existed, no higher intelligent beings ever existed, the truth would still exist somehow out in the world. It would still be true that 2 + 2 = 4, even if no one ever recognized that or thought about it. Even if everyone disagreed, people forgot. Everybody became like that infamous Harvard PhD student in statistics who says 2 + 2 = 5. Even
Yeah.
if everybody became like that, it would still be true that 2 + 2 = 4 because it has nothing to do with us. Now, if you think morality is like that, and you think that everything or much of what we believe about morality is due to evolved because those intuitions cause adaptive behavior, then there could be a problem. And the reason is we don't think that natural selection tracks moral truth. So natural selection might track truth with respect to our beliefs about medium-sized physical objects. So this rock, is bigger than that rock. There are two lions behind the tree, and one came out. So there's one lion behind the tree. So those are to know the truth about those kinds of things. That's adaptive. So natural selection cares about whether you know the truth about that. When it comes to ethics, natural selection doesn't care. It's just whatever promotes, inclusive fitness. So a theory like reciprocal altruism, which says that we cooperate with people and with with partners in certain ways. By I give him something, he gives me something, and this is adaptive to have certain dispositions, to cooperate with other people and to reciprocate, and then they give you something in return. Now, given the conditions in which our species evolved, we were subject to these selection pressures, so that if you give something to me, I want to give something back to you. But if we had evolved as, more a less social species, but had somehow evolved a higher level of intelligence, we just wouldn't have those intuitions. We wouldn't care about cooperation. Or we might have evolved like ants, which have the different way of passing on their genetic material, so that an ant colony is more closely related to each other. So they're more invested. They're more invested in the success of those that they live with. Then we would feel far more altruistic, and we would have a different set of moral intuitions. So this has nothing to do with moral truth. You say even if moral truth existed, there's no reason to think natural selection would give us intuitions that line up with that truth. So now, because the combination of all these facts, that our moral beliefs, we think ethics is about some objective, mind-independent truth. Our moral beliefs have been shaped by natural selection, and natural selection doesn't care about morality. So now there's no reason to take our moral intuitions seriously. And at least if you construe our moral intuitions as being real, mind independently real, which is how most people, in fact, think about morality.
Intuitively.
Yeah, intuitively. Yeah. There's math, there's ethics. These are laws. You can't go around murdering people. It's just a fact. That's how most people see it. And that view of morality is challenged by these genealogical arguments.
Sorry, I have to you give me a lot to digest. So there's the insecurity around certain statements, let's just say, about human beings' relationship to biology. And one thing that you've gone into quite extensively lately in your Substack, and that's all I know of you, so I don't know the genealogy of your thought, but you're bringing up this problem of wokeness. So that's a kind of a current dilemma, or very salient to the culture war. What is wokeness? And you propose that wokeness is founded on an errant belief in, and I'm going to butcher this, so if you can help me shore this up, equality as a universal human quality. Equality is just a human equality. And that moral claim, would you say that equality, the liberal projection of everybody is basically a unit that can be exchanged, and they're only variable depending on their so-called culture, that is what leads to the place that we are now with regard to so-called wokeness, or the equitization of, and then the suppression of different people based on their genetic characteristics, while at the same time saying that these genetic characteristics don't have any inherent value other than some sort of social fixation. Could you clarify that for me? Because that's kind of the intersection again of biology and morality, and that a lot of people are really wary of that. They call it racist, and racist is a very bad thing for a lot of people, for most people in our society.
To clarify, there's blank slatism is the view that basically we have a limited number of innate characteristics. Our innate mental endowment is just, say, a disposition to learn, a kind of general learning disposition, a disposition to find certain stimuli reinforcing. But the most of what characterizes the human mind is the result of conditioning, socialization, and it of course follows that differences between people are mostly the result of
Environmental,
socialization
yeah,
or physical
socialization.
differences. Like if you, which as a result of having physical differences, you have different. You find yourself in a different environment, which cultivates different traits. But there's a lot of innate structure in the brain, so that's blank slatism. Then there's another position, which is that we're not blank slates. So this is one of a view that could be associated with evolutionary psychology or some interpretations of evolutionary psychology. We're not blank slates. There's a lot of structure, but there isn't a lot of variation. So you could say this among individuals, they are born with robust biological endowments, robust mental dispositions, but it's the differences in socialization that then cause one person to be a great musician, and one person to be a great scholar, and one person to not live up to his potential. And most people are, and in the establishment, would acknowledge that there are heritable differences, at least to some extent, between individuals. Like most people are going to acknowledge that not everybody is born to be Einstein. Not every
Or Kobe Bryant.
Yeah, and when it comes to physical differences, yeah, most people acknowledge that no matter how hard I try, I'm never going to be 7 feet tall and a basketball player, right? And it's not just, if I had been raised by Shaquille O'Neal's parents, I would still not have made the NBA. So the hereditarian thesis says that, at least, well, with respect to individual differences, says that the genes play some important role in differences in outcomes among individuals. Now, there's the more controversial issue of differences between populations, and particularly races or the sexes. So races have, on average, different outcomes, different distributions of various traits. Not just physical, obviously there are physical differences, but also in psychological differences, like intelligence. Different components of intelligence are different between different races. And these are associated with differences in socioeconomic status. Now, so the question is whether these differences could be attributed to genetic differences. And that would be hereditarianism with respect to race. Now, my view is that wokeism is what, given a background of Christian morality, which makes us sensitive to people being deprived and people not living up to their, being given the opportunity to live up to their potential. Given that moral background, wokeism is what follows from taking the equality thesis seriously. So equality says that at least among groups, there are the same distributions of innate ability, and therefore any differences in outcome must be the result of the environmental forces. Because we're saying it's not genes, therefore it must be the environment. So there's some environmental force that causes, say, the African American population to have an average IQ of 85, and the European population to have an average IQ of 100, and the East Asian population to have an IQ of something like 104, 105.
Mm.
And it's got to be environmental because there's no other option. So now, if there's an environmental cause, and theoretically it should be under our control. Like, what is it? What is causing these terrible differences in outcome? It's a moral emergency. And this triggers a hunt for the environmental cause having this terrible effect. And in practice, the environmental cause that is going to be identified is racism, either current racism or the legacy of past racism. And there will be a hunt for more and more subtle forms of racism, trying to find these environmental forces that are causing the, even though we've criminalized racism, racists are the most despised people in our society. Anybody who's even accused of racism is expelled from polite society in most cases. So racism must take some very mysterious form. Maybe it's statues of white men who had a politically incorrect view. Let's tear down the statues. Or maybe if you tell a black person that he's articulate, maybe that has a devastating harm that causes some serious problem because it's a microaggression. Now, what else can it be? Because you're saying it's not genes. It's not genes. So what is it? It's got to be environmental. And this is what wokeism is. It's the crusade to root out the hidden racism, which is the natural consequence of taking the equality thesis seriously.
So there's this dichotomy that became very popular in the culture war, where you have the classical liberal set versus the radicalized woke set or social justice set. And the classical liberal position was that we are seeking equality of opportunity, not equality of outcomes. And that was the distinction. The liberals were saying to the wokies, you're looking for equality of outcomes. That is Marxism. That's going too far. That ends in disaster every single time. What you're pointing to, perhaps, is that equality of opportunity in and of itself leads to equality of outcomes, because there's no way to measure if there's equality of opportunity without the feedback loop of equality of outcomes. So even believing in equality of opportunity sets a society, or at least the elites, on a quest to provide that opportunity. And if the opportunity comes from, and so the opportunity, if it's not hard coded into your genes, it's got to be environmental. And so we have to start to play around with that equality of opportunity by redistributing. So already the equality of outcomes is baked into equality of opportunity. Is that
well,
close?
the classical liberals and kind of the non-woke left, they say, yeah, it's environmental, but that's okay. Just people have equality of opportunity. Just judge people as individuals. If it turns out that for some reason African Americans have an IQ that's 15 points lower than whites, and Harvard released a study in 2013 that said if admissions were based only on academic qualifications, blacks would be 0.7% of undergraduates. So the classical liberal says, well, that's just how it is. Just I don't see race. Just treat people as individuals. In other words, they don't care about the problem.
Okay.
And
Wait,
that,
they don't care about what problem?
well, if they say these disparities are caused by the environment, because they don't say they're caused by genes. So they say there's some environmental cause that is causing enormous disparities, but they're not going to worry about that. And they're just going to say, let's treat everyone as individuals and allow the disparities to persist and act like that's not a serious problem that needs to be corrected right now. And that is a message that resonates with fewer and fewer people because, I mean, given our kind of common sense moral views,
Hmm.
it's just not an acceptable state of affairs for
That there's only
us.
that less than 0% or approaching 0% of college professors are black. That just doesn't
So it,
seem right to us. It's
right
not
in a
fair.
colorblind, well, let's say they were right. Let's say these um, like if North and South Korea were to unify, then I'm sure it would be the case that North Koreans would have far worse outcomes than South Koreans, even though they're genetically basically the same.
For the first
Now,
generation or two
for
generations.
at least for the first generation, it might persist a little bit. It does take some time to get back up to speed. So under those conditions, you would say we need to do something to because obviously the North Koreans haven't reached their full potential. We need to
Yeah.
invest a lot uh,
To
in
jumpstart. Yeah.
yeah, because there's going to be a big payoff. They're not reaching their potential. It wasn't their fault. It was these environmental forces. We
Hmm.
need to fix the environment, and then we can return to, just treating everyone as individuals. But for now, I mean, that would make a lot of sense. Let's invest in fixing the environmental problem because the environment is under our control. Let's do what we can to fix the environmental problem. Uh, and that's kind of what most people would think if they believe that black, white, Asian disparities are the result of the
Purely
environment.
the result of environment
Because
or
we just need to fix it.
historical. Yeah.
Yeah. Once we fix it, then the work will be done. Then no problem. We
And
can,
how's that working out for us?
well, it will never work. It's not going to work because these disparities are rooted not 100%, but genes do play an important role in producing these disparities.
Hmm.
And there's just a limit to how much they can be corrected. And
Well, the assumption that something needs to be corrected is should be also investigated.
yeah, so I'm for the sake of argument, I'm accepting these moral premises.
Okay.
Um, Now, as a matter of fact, maybe I don't share them, but I I mean it's much less radical to just make an empirical claim than to attack the foundations of Western morality. We'll deal with that later.
Okay.
But for now, just wokeism is motivated by this wrong empirical belief. The wrong empirical belief is the equality thesis. tell people the equality thesis is wrong, and then wokeism becomes, untenable.
Maybe it's untenable, but untenable to believe, untenable to practice, or just seen as something that is just like on the face of it and in its core, just not true, not proper, not realistic.
Uh, So I see it like this. It's not like people are machines and they form beliefs in a perfectly consistent way, and they have this empirical belief and these moral premises, and A, B, and C follow from that, and then therefore they're committed to A, B, C. And if I show that the empirical premise is wrong and no, it's X, Y, Z that is now implied, then they suddenly switch. That's not how people are. But there's
Hmm.
just a general tendency that most intelligent, morally sensitive people have, that when they recognize that there are these disparities, they think the disparities are caused by the environment. And the most obvious environmental explanation for the disparities is racism, past or present. Most people have a tendency to be receptive to wokeism, given
Okay.
those assumptions. And just over time, the ratchet moves to more wokeism
Okay.
because on average, the wokesters win the argument. As long as people aren't allowed to talk about genes, the wokesters tend to win the argument. And that's why over time, we just go in the direction of more and more wokeism. And until you're allowed to fight back and target wokeism at its roots, we will continue to just lose the argument. Uh, there are people who will learn about genetic differences, and say, well, I don't care. I'm still going to be woke. We should still fight racism forever. Or we should still try, like Catherine Page Harden, who doesn't say that explicitly that she believes in group differences, but she at least believes in individual differences, remains theoretically open to the possibility of group differences, but she says none of that matters. We'll just carry on as before. We'll have to correct for the unfairness of the genetic lottery, something like that. So there will be people who have views like that and who remain or who try to be woke even after the all the beliefs that motivated wokeism are undermined. But that is not going to be a successful strategy in the long run, because again, these people will now be in the position of the conservative or the right winger. They're going to generally lose the argument. And over time, they'll lose the argument, and will shift away from wokeism.
But there was something else or there's just this word to correct something. Like the moral obligation or the animating force of the morality or how it is active is through this desire to correct. In this case, racism. Why do you think racism, there are two questions. Why do you think racism is seen as a problem to correct, and why are our elites concerned with correcting society or correcting things? Isn't that just that's some sort of like that you would assume that these things need to be corrected? There's something there that is often just accepted without really questioned.
Yeah, and so
All the way
you know,
from like the church lady down the street to the WEF. It's the same impulse.
uh, I mean, I point out in the Substack post that racial disparities would not have been a problem for an Aztec or Genghis Khan or a Roman pagan. Who cares? They wouldn't have cared that, oh, another group didn't live up to the Carthaginians, didn't live up to their potential. maybe that's a good thing. It's just not part of their moral
Yeah.
language to
They
be
accept the
concerned about it
differences. Okay.
in the
Yeah.
same way.
Concerned. Yeah.
So maybe it's because they're genetic, they didn't say genes, but maybe they're just naturally different, or maybe it's because of cultural differences. It's just equality was not their main concern, especially across groups. Maybe they had equality within the group in certain limited respects might have been important to them, but not the equality of
Not
humans.
universal. Yeah.
Right. So this was um, the so there's maybe a complicated history of the idea of equality and how it took root and ultimately its current form. But and certainly an important uh, part of the story is Christianity, the idea of a monotheistic God who cares about all of humanity as spiritual equals, and this idea being uh, really a fundamental tenet of Western thought. And there's also a phenomenon that when groups are living together and sort of trying to come to mutual understanding, conspicuous disparities in outcome pose a problem, not only in the West, but in other countries. There have been, I mean, even affirmative action existed in China, in ancient China, when just certain regions
Hmm.
were better at passing the imperial exam. They that was considered unacceptable, and they needed
In order to
quotas
preserve,
and
in order to preserve peace or harmony, or
yeah,
yeah,
um, and other um, places in the world where one group is significantly outperforming another. This is a cause of tension, and it's natural that people would try to smooth it. The leaders would try to come up with a solution to keep the peace.
yeah.
And maybe sometimes it worked. I mean, China probably survived uh, a little bit of affirmative action. I don't know if that was what did them in. Um,
Hmm.
so we have this philosophical or religious concept of equality, and in addition, we have social tension
Yeah.
caused by racial
Practical
disparities.
concerns. Yeah.
Uh, then in a democracy, certainly uh, often favors uh, political spokesmen who emphasize equality, sort of the equality of the masses, and all of these trends coming together. It's not um, too mysterious why we would gravitate toward these beliefs.
Yeah. How do you suppose from the position of somebody like me who grew up, 80s, 90s, equality was the law of the land. We were colorblind. We just kind of got along, and it was laissez-faire culturally, more or less, for different groups to kind of just be themselves and get along. And that being the main assumption that to be racism, to be racist, to see somebody and to judge them by the color of their skin was just bad. How do you go from that to being able to judge somebody by the, especially for the midwit group or the low wit group? Like once you introduce racism from the elite point of view as the law of the land, or race realism rather, then those, how do you suppose that those racial tensions will not be heightened if race is seen as something real or tethered to reality?
After the civil rights legislation of the 1960s, everybody thought that the racial problems were going to just work themselves out.
Yeah.
Uh, so that dream lasted for a while. I mean, because why not? Uh, you let the Jews out of the ghettos, and then it kind of works out. Um, Usually, but obviously that didn't happen. So people, and that became more and more clear as time went on. And even when I was born in the late 80s, um, in the 90s, which I sort of remember, people were still talking about color blindness as an ideal and judging
Mhm.
people by the content of their character, and that all seemed really reasonable. And I'm quite sure that when I was a kid, a teenager, many people in my generation thought that we were nearing the end of racism, and that kind of we had grown up without being racist, without really thinking about race and having friends of different races and not really thinking about it. Um, that there was really no reason for this um, to continue forever. And then, yeah, it just over time, the the disparities stopped closing, and we it doesn't matter how much money you throw at the problem or how much education you give, or uh, the gaps have just stabilized.
Hmm.
And uh, it's impossible to maintain that attitude that people had in the 80s and 90s and maybe in the 2000s. At a certain point, it was going to the dream
Hmm.
would be dashed.
Yeah. But it's still a terrible. What's the alternative to that?
So now, when you say the solution to wokeism is to teach people about hereditarianism and that these differences are just the product of nature and therefore there's not much you can do about it. Although I think there could be a case for at least some limited um, affirmative action. I mean, if especially when it comes to like government positions, there should be some representation like
Okay.
of different groups in the society. I think that's at least a reasonable position, um, and some representation of different groups in
It's
uh,
practical that people would want to be ruled by people like them.
right. So, what the ultimate long-term solution would be is something that we could think about. But at least in the medium term, I think there could be some justification for that. But um, there wouldn't be a justification for a a war on racism when racism is not really the problem. That's not what's causing differences in outcome. So
Hmm.
we need to tone down the war on racism. Now, people imagine all sorts of bad results from teaching people this information. So
Yeah.
yeah, well, didn't the Nazis also believe that? And doesn't or don't racists isn't this giving support to racists and their bad agenda to murder people who look different from them?
Yeah.
And uh, there are a number of things to say about that argument. And first, Nazism was not based on science. There's very little that was scientific about Nazism. Their social science was totally corrupt, uh, full of made-up claims and bias from top to bottom. They rejected IQ testing because they didn't like the results.
Hmm.
And they came up with a kind of IQ test that's more like the Howard Gardner's emotional intelligence, which
Oh,
tested
interesting.
stuff like their their racial spirit or something like that.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, and of course, their anthropology was notoriously corrupt. It was just based on, they didn't even believe in evolution by natural selection. They rejected Darwinism and believed in world ice theory, which is some completely bizarre creation
Okay, I've never
story,
heard of that one. That
origin
must be
story.
really interesting. Yeah.
Uh, um,
World ice theory.
World ice
That's
theory.
like
They
came from a Slurpee. Some guy got a
uh,
brain freeze. Like, oh, I understand the origins of humanity.
it's more bizarre than you can imagine. I don't even know how to describe it. Sometimes people don't believe me when I say this, but look up Robert Richards' paper, "Was Hitler a Darwinian?" Um, he's a historian of biology at Chicago. Very good article, which shows decisively that
Hmm.
Darwinism had no influence over Nazi ideology.
Yeah.
If you look at the current racists, like the Stormfront crowd, I mean, you think these people are influenced by science? I, they
Yes. Well, see, that's
they're
kind
not.
of that's my question. That's my question because one of your articles, your writing's phenomenal. Everybody needs to go check you out. The links will be in the description. But you say the conservatives have an IQ problem or something to that extent. Like the conservatives aren't the smartest bloc. So if we reduce everything into intelligence, that isn't going to necessarily follow that the conservatives are going to have some claim to moral authority because of the way that this one vector called IQ shakes out politically. But the problem still being that if race realism is enshrined by people who think in terms in kind of low resolution terms of like race is this good, that bad, like politically, like in group, out group, like how do you have a multi-ethnic society that has realism in the differences in these genetic inheritances without that clash going on?
So our intuitions about what a race realist world would look like are distorted by the fact that current race realists are a very mixed bag, right?
Okay.
That's a like I would not want to be ruled by if the if all the people who currently identify as race realists elected a president, I would not want to be ruled by that president, right?
Hmm.
Uh, uh, he would probably be a lot worse than the current one because I mean this is who becomes race realist? I mean, using scare quotes around that term, right?
Hmm.
Who identifies as race realists? Well, there are people who studied the evidence carefully and they had the intelligence and education to critically examine it and separate the good ideas from the bad and come to a well-informed conclusion that yes, genes are playing a role in differences in outcomes. Now there are those people, and I like to think maybe we're among that group.
Hmm.
But there's another group, which is people who were, just looking for trouble, who just disagree with everything that the establishment says, conspiracy theorists, people who uh, maybe conform to the actual stereotype that liberals have of race realists, that they're just haters and they're looking for an outlet to express hostility. There are a lot of people like that. And then they say, "Oh, I'm a race realist. I believe in science."
Yeah.
And in reality, they just cherry pick, whatever so-called science
Yeah.
they think supports their view. And most of them are basically a different kind of wokester, where they just substitute Jews for whites.
Yeah.
So instead of whites being the evil force,
Masterminds of the universe. Yeah.
this is what wokeism says. Why are whites doing better in some respects than blacks? It must be because we live in a white supremacy and and they're cheating, they're keeping the blacks down. So they look at Jews who have an average IQ of like 110 or 112, and they say, why are they, you know, in certain prominent positions? Why are they overrepresented compared to whites? And they think exactly the same thing. It must
Hmm.
be that there's a Jewish supremacy and there's a conspiracy, and they're trying to exterminate us. So the people who
Mm.
would identify as race realists include uh, probably mostly these people. And so now we think, well, what would happen if everybody became race realists? Well, look at what a disaster this is. We would all become like this, and that's bad. And it would be better just to
Mm.
vote for Joe Biden. Now, my my objection to that argument is that if we be, race realism became accepted, then it would be accepted by a different group of people, a, in many cases, a higher caliber uh, people.
Higher caliber how?
So
Morally?
having more normal moral intuitions,
Yeah.
more thoughtful, more responsible, more invested in
More humanitarian, more humane. So they would still
not,
have some sort of Christian morality, more or less. They'd still be fair, kind, love thy neighbor, turn the other cheek ish, but they would also be more realistic with regard to the
yeah.
outcomes of different demographics.
Although I do think that this would be a blow to Christian morality if people accepted race realism, because it would be such a blow to the authority of the establishment and the tradition, which will be, which then people will know have lied to them about such an important
Well,
issue.
that goes not just to the morality, but that goes to equality under the law. What is equality under the law? What happens to equality under the law under a race realist system?
Yeah, well, I mean, we have equality under the law, even though people acknowledge that there are individual differences. I mean, Einstein and, Ralph Wiggum are both equal under the law.
Okay.
Uh,
So I'm just saying, like, this is why the conversation gets so fraught, because people aren't able to. There's so many places where it can break. Like we're trying to walk this empirical set of facts through all the implications morally. It breaks down in all these different things because it's so dangerous. It could be the case that people, if they see race, they're going to start to judge people differently based on the color of their skin.
but also, so these are risks of race realism, but we also
Yes.
have to balance them against the risks of no race realism. So right
Yeah. Okay.
now, we're losing equality under the law already without race realism. And wokeism also destroys equality under the law.
Okay.
Right now, if there's a conflict between two people, the race of those two people is highly relevant to how that conflict will be treated by the law.
Hmm.
And everybody knows that. Um, how the conflict will be perceived by society, how it will be treated by the law, who will be blamed. Those are um, the law is not
Mm.
race blind.
Yeah.
And
But the assumption of blame going from white to black back to black to white, or like the assumption of blame distilling back to skin color is still like, do we have to do that? Like, is that inevitable? Is it
well,
inevitable?
well, I don't want to blame, but my goal isn't to blame anybody.
Okay.
That's just that there's disparity, and I'm not saying that there should be segregation or anything like that. It's Um, I mean, my favored policy is to move to more freedom of association. If people want to integrate and
Hmm.
have multicultural communities, which many will, then they'll have the freedom to do that. If they want to move to Arkansas and just
Hmm.
have their all white community, but it's not where I'm going to move. I'm not going to move there, but uh, they can do that. Yeah. And so just back away from the social engineering, the crusade on hidden racism,
Mm.
and this highly racialized legal system, which treats people differently based on race and is highly concerned with correcting for racial issues, addressing racial issues. Back away from that, and I think that is moving us toward a solution.
So if nothing else, race realism from your point of view, not as a tribal signifier or an accelerant for racial tensions, but just realistic expectations of different groups. If that idea did nothing other than get the current regime or the elites in these various Western countries to just back off of trying to fix this problem, that would be a boon in and of itself. That would be progress in your book.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And also, I think there's a terrible crime that is committed against people by teaching them these false uh, beliefs that they're the environment has caused these disparities, and now our task is to fix it and to defeat the hidden racism. Think of all the emotional energy that is invested in worrying about this and fighting this, just in fighting nature, fighting reality. Uh, and that's really terrible, I think, to subject people from childhood onward to these false ideas.
This might be a petty point, but isn't evolutionary biology / psychology saying the same thing, that the environment is to blame for these differences, just like on a much broader scale of what the environment is?
Well, in
conceived
the
of?
literature, we usually distinguish environment and genes and environment. So
Okay.
as forces that are operating on not on phylogenetic time, but
Yeah. Yeah.
now
Yeah.
within generations. But yes, in a sense, yeah, it's the environment, it's Mother Nature, which to anthropomorphize it, Mother Nature's fault.
Quite a while ago in this conversation, you brought up status, and I'm wondering, there was just an idea there that status is kind of culturally dependent. It's cultural dependent. So in one of your articles, you made a really clever use of Google. I think that was your search engine of choice. And you looked up the fastest person in Israel and the richest person in Jamaica. And the richest person in Jamaica is Jewish, and the fastest person in Israel is what, sub-Saharan
He's
African,
a
or
Ghanan.
he's Ghanaian.
He's the son of somebody who works for the Ghanan embassy in Israel.
Oh, well, there we go.
So yeah,
But
I bet he's
so
Israeli citizen. Yeah.
so those genetic proclivities towards being financially minded, or abstractly being able to move around abstract objects and then being able to run really fast for a long time, those are independent of status. And to make this is probably getting into social engineering, but if the outcomes are different for different groups, if the NBA is, or different sports in America at least tend to favor different body types, and those body types tend to arise in from certain gene pools. And if financial activity just kind of is genetically based, not just on proclivities and environment, but also just genetic proclivities. To put, like, society's going to put different people on the pedestal Right. And a lot of the HR wokeism is trying to engineer not just financial outcomes or equality of outcomes financially, but also morally by saying, like with Hollywood, with this engineering of we're just going to splash black people in every position of power, like whatever happened with Gemini, we're just going to raise the black person up because we're going to give them status. We can't give them, we're going to try to equalize, by means of status giving these genetic lotteries. We're going to constantly engineer status. It seems like if the emphasis on status is equitized too, I wonder if that would be a way of decreasing tension because the tensions are going to arise.
There can be some measures taken to do that, although in certain positions like being a leader, having a political position, being a member of cabinet, or being the leader of a important business, influential corporation, those kinds of positions are inevitably going to carry status, and they're also in a colorblind system are going to tend to be occupied by
The most
disproportionately
capable.
by certain groups, and that would be highly correlated with just general intelligence or IQ. And I mean, there are quite a lot of, to speak of blacks, quite a lot of high status blacks. I mean, more people,
Based on merit,
prop,
not based on like being force fed
being
them.
based on merit.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah, uh, more people probably want to be an NBA player or a
Pop
famous
star.
musician
Yeah. Yeah.
than a professor at Harvard. I mean, some people want to be a professor at Harvard very much, but I think for the average person, yeah, a professor of Harvard, that's impressive, but that doesn't carry more status than um, being a great basketball player. Uh, uh, so it's not like it just happens to work out that way. It's not like nature is fair. And so, well, whites and Asians got this and blacks got this
Yeah.
to compensate them. It just happens to work out that in many cases, uh, racial groups who are underrepresented in certain areas are sometimes overrepresented in other areas. Uh, Intelligence itself is not necessarily one dimensional, although we talk about general intelligence measured by IQ. In fact, uh, different racial groups are tilted, towards quantitative ability or toward verbal ability. They have different psychological traits, although differences in psychology are much less well understood, the differences in intelligence. But different groups will tend to express each group's genius in a different way with a different flavor. And so even in a colorblind system, I think there will certainly be representation
Of excellence.
of genuine excellence across racial groups. It's just that in those domains which which reward heavily general intelligence, there will often be these gaps, and those positions will carry some status, and unless we have some kind of affirmative action, which I'm not saying that I have a blanket opposition to. In some cases, maybe there could be some affirmative action, but without affirmative action, certain groups will not achieve the same level of status in those areas. So
It seems like there's a kind of a pax liberata or something like that, where just colorblindness itself as a given, did a lot of work to release people from the tensions that just came back through realism. And it seems like wokeism is very tenacious, and it doesn't want your position to become standard. And I don't know why it wouldn't want to follow that. There's a very strong moral objection whenever somebody in your position says the things that you're saying. And so I'm wondering how do you countenance yourself towards the pushback that you receive? Like, what is the proper way for you to proceed with these very contentious ideas? And what's your hope that they'll? Do you think that they will penetrate the elite eventually?
Eventually, yes, I would like to see it happen as soon as possible. Now, the reason wokeism can't tolerate my investigations into this is, I mean, wokeism is all because the premise is it's just a fact that there are no differences, genetically based differences between populations. So it says this is established. This is not something we can argue about, but there is this hidden racism which is having these terrible effects. So the wokesters are very sensitive to anything that can be seen as racism. So why would somebody talk about this or make the suggestion that hereditarianism is true when we know that it's not true? It must be that they're racist. So we've got to get the racist. So from their perspective, this is logical. Now, what is the path to victory for the hereditarian? That's the difficult question. Now, first, we should just note that we're right. The evidence is overwhelmingly on our side. I mean, if this was not a politically controversial issue, then nobody would argue about it. There are differences between people. Genes play a huge role, and that's the way it is. And anybody who looks at the evidence in an open-minded way will see that this is the case. So that's the big advantage. We don't have power. We don't have media. We don't have, anything. We don't have anything like that. But we have something that's true. Then we can prove it according to normal standards of evidence.
Mm-hmm.
Now, there are a lot of people who know that this is true, including at universities, including outside universities, and prominent people. Lots of people who know that this is true. And what they have to do is, well, some people have said, I'm naive to think that we'll ever win because the taboo is just too strong. And I'm asking to change human nature because people just can't accept these ideas. Taboos
Is
are
that
not
human nature? Yeah, that's not human nature.
Somebody said that it was human. I wanted to change human nature because by trying to teach people about hereditarianism, that would require changing human nature. I don't know why.
That doesn't seem
taboo
correct, but people
taboo
say
is,
all sorts of things.
yeah, not a law of nature.
Yeah.
And over time, taboos change.
Yeah.
The taboos of 500 years ago are very different from the taboos of today. And even the taboos of 150 years ago, 100 years ago, 50 years ago, 10 years ago. 10 years ago, there was all sorts of things you could talk about, or at least 12 years ago. And the Great Awakening was like 2012.
Yeah.
12, 13 years ago, very much within our memory. You could totally different range of views that you were allowed to talk about, allowed to express. And now you're not. So, but now people think that this taboo is carved in iron and can never be changed. the reason that the taboo persists, one of the reasons is that nobody challenges it. People are just afraid.
Well, and a
Yeah.
lot of people have a lot riding on it too. I mean, it's hard to convince a man to denounce something on which his paycheck depends.
Yes, that's true. But the liberals were willing to put their necks to stick their necks out for their beliefs. There were plenty of commies and liberals who got fired, uh, who
Hmm.
paid real price to advance the cause, um, one
Hmm.
lost job at a time, and then they won.
Yeah.
So I said, well, how could we ever fight the liberals? Well, um, one one lesson people have to learn is that you have to show up to the fight.
Hmm.
You, if you're saying, can we win without ever paying any price, without ever sacrificing anything? Then the answer is probably no. But my message is that people need to recognize what's at stake, that everything is at stake. They're going to tear down societies, searching for the hidden racism which isn't there. And I think we need to stop that from happening. And look at
Hmm.
what we've lost. We've lost free speech, everyone, living in fear of crossing the woke mob.
Yeah. Well, I mean,
And
we're losing boundaries too, national boundaries. At least certain countries are.
if that's something that people care about, and I do care about that,
Hmm.
then yeah, the, there ought to be motivation. So I describe what we stand to lose, and people need to consider: uh, is it worth taking a stand?
Hmm. You mentioned the liberals and you speak about the liberals as though you're not a liberal. What would you be? What would you be if you're not a liberal?
So I don't. I used to call myself a conservative just because conservative isn't liberal. And so, well, if I'm
Yeah.
not liberal, I guess I'm a conservative. I stopped doing that last year after I attended the National Conservatism Conference in London, where so many of the speeches were uh, um, uh, lambasting transhumanism, which, as far as I could tell, refers to any attempt to better the human condition,
Hmm.
particularly through genetic intervention. I'm very much in favor of that. Uh, and uh, Conservatism is infused with a really Christian spirit that I don't identify with,
Hmm.
and emphasis on faith and tradition. And although I tradition I think has a place, I'm not. My political identity isn't centered on returning to past traditions, whatever that means.
Hmm.
But I want to move forward into something new, create something, uh, a new world based on our new condition and new reality. But uh, I consider myself to be generally on the right. Uh, I accept, in principle, hierarchy, inequality, and although equality under the law, I think, is a very desirable condition, but for various reasons that we should have equality under the law, but um, inequality of outcome, recognizing that different the differences in value among different associated with different traits, uh, and I don't get, and I see leftism, liberalism, or at least leftism, as being more concerned with emphasizing a Christian kind of equality, which I don't believe in. And liberalism, in some respects, I am liberal. Uh, I I believe that there should be free speech, uh, freedom of thought, uh,
Limited
but
government. Yeah.
yeah, certainly free markets. Um, just because that's the most effective way economically for wealth generation and um, in general pro more on the side of freedom. But liberalism, which advocates tearing down all boundaries between people, open borders, uh,
Global citizenship kind of stuff.
yeah, and also which either in principle or in practice adopts a hostile stance to all forms of group identity, which I think deserves, I think has a right to exist in some form. Uh,
Hmm.
that kind of liberalism is something I reject.
You signaled, it almost sounded like you're less in favor of social engineering, but you're more in favor of genetic engineering. Is that an open topic for you? And I just wonder if you have, being a philosopher, you have thought through the morals or the ethics of genetic engineering, if that's something that,
Yes, I have thought about that.
oh, you've thought about it.
But I so genetic engineering doesn't mean the government tells you what you have to do. But, so embryo selection is becoming an option. So it will be possible to select among uh, embryos based on what kinds of outcomes you care most about, and people can
Who
select
cares
from.
most about?
So the
Like the person
parents,
who's so the
the
person
parents,
who's investing. Okay.
uh, not not the government. So the parents will, um, based on their own genetic material, will be able to produce a number of embryos, and then you can predict sequencing the the gene the genome. You can
Wow.
predict this one is going to be more likely to be intelligent. This one is more likely to be musical. This is happening now, and this will push us in a positive direction. And
Really?
there's
I mean, I'm just thinking science fictiony. If this is going to accelerate evolution and it's going to accelerate disparity, is it
oh
not?
yes, it will. It will
Yeah.
certainly. So
Is
the embryo selection will be disproportionately used by
the
the
elite?
most
Yeah.
intelligent and foresightful people, and kind of the people who don't really think about it will just do it the old-fashioned way and without planning at all.
Hmm.
And so there will be certainly a divergence, possibly also a divergence in multiple directions as different people select for different traits. But on the so that will produce more inequality, which for me is not concerned. I don't care about that.
Hmm.
And if there are more intelligent people,
Hmm.
I mean, as far as um, the general living standard of
Yeah.
the population, is going to go up for everybody because
It doesn't
everybody
necessarily
benefit.
follow that the more intelligent would oppress the less intelligent, or the more developed would oppress the less developed.
Well, they could do it now, but they don't. I mean, the if everyone with an IQ over 100 decided to enslave everyone with an IQ under 100 or under 80, they could easily do that if they had the desire.
What
It's
if
just that they don't.
Christian morality is what's keeping them from doing that, though? Isn't that a good thing?
Well,
I'm just venturing.
from the perspective of Christian morality. Now, I'm not saying that
Huh.
that according to my preferred morality that's what we would do, but um,
Hmm.
I mean, I don't see why that would be particularly um, even desirable for
One would
more
wonder
people.
if that would be the smart thing to do, if enslaving or just lifting up and
Yeah,
utilizing
but
that
that there
potential.
also it's a question of there's a question of whether that would economically make sense because we do benefit from people by even less intelligent people by trading with them
Well, yeah,
and
and
getting an
you're
economic exchange.
some people are gonna be better at digging ditches or paying attention to more mundane tasks, and those mundane tasks, assuming AI doesn't take over everything,
Yeah.
those
And
mundane tasks are still gonna be valuable.
and also people might even the intelligent people don't want to live in fear that the system in which they participate will potentially decide to enslave certain people based on some qualities. Who knows? Maybe one day I'll be on the wrong side of the equation.
Yeah, yeah.
So I
Hmm.
think there are a number of reasons why uh, I wouldn't support that that proposal. But
Okay.
the point is, right now we could the intelligent people could oppress the unintelligent in all sorts of ways, which they don't do. In fact, they
Maybe they
transfer.
do, but they're so smart that we can't tell.
Well, uh, no one has told me about this yet. I hope that I at least have an IQ above 100. So
You haven't got a
um,
call yet. You know,
well,
the 180 plus club. That's who's running everything.
um,
Hmm.
so I don't. If it's not happening now, I don't see why we would expect it to happen
Hmm.
when some segment of the population increases its mean IQ by 15 points.
The one strength for Christian morality, in my point of view, is that it scales. It at least, and you're probably going to be able to see this clearer than I do. But if you just take the example of a medieval kind of province, they were united in the same story. Like the same Bible was read and believed in by the upper crust and the lower crust, right? So Christian morality has proven to scale and to unify people of different intelligences or different even ethnicities. Like it's really good at unifying people to a certain kind of degree, and then also facilitating goodwill among men, which is a very positive attribute for a society. It actually is very economically beneficial too, with goodwill among men and basic moralities and stuff. What you say you disagree with certain aspects of Christianity. Is there do you have a moral framework that you think scales across and unifies and can foster the same sort of goodwill as Christianity does?
Well, the assumption that those are desirable qualities of a moral system is a judgment that can be only be made from the perspective of a moral system. And
Mm,
so we're kind
mm,
of
mm.
Christian morality certainly is a big success from the perspective of Christian morality, but that would of course be which is what our kind of default position, right, in the West as Westerners
Yes.
we think of.
Yeah.
Uh, Now, to any successful ideological system will have this quality of having a way to appeal to people across the intelligence spectrum. So there'll be a very simple message
Hmm.
for, um, and this is why Judaism, which is of course the progenitor of Christianity and Islam, never uh, took off in its original form. It never became widely practiced. Although certainly in ancient Roman times, Judaism was kind of popular, cool
Mm.
kind of thing. It was like a big commitment. You have to not just circumcision, which is the most famous barrier to entry. Uh, Also, there's a lot of stuff. There's so many rules and ideas that you're supposed to understand, and
It was very
that's
exclusive.
it's even though they may have welcome converts, it's just very intense, very difficult, and there aren't a um, it's more difficult to appeal to the full spectrum of humanity. Uh, it's really more for intense. I mean, if you're born into it, kind of you have no choice. But from the perspective of converts, you have to make a huge commitment, and you have to, change your whole life. When Judaism then transformed into Christianity, which got rid of the rituals, kind of streamlined the message to this very powerful idea of kind of God's of love um, and forgiveness, and the idea that those who are the meek, those who are meek now will be rewarded later. A few a few ideas like this, then um, that was something that could capture the attention of more average people. And at the same time, it has these very complicated discussions about the nature of God, and is God one or three, and
Hmm.
where does the Pope get his authority, and many complicated um, uh, um, intellectual questions in Christianity, which gave material, as much material as you wanted for a smart person to
Hmm.
get into. So, I mean, that was an important part of the success of Christianity. Uh, Now, leftism maybe had some of that, and there's certainly a very simple kind of leftist impulse of sort of, we're all the same, give me what's
Hmm.
mine,
Hmm.
uh, which is what kind of the average person, the average leftist might think of, eat the rich.
Yeah.
And then, of course, they have all these sophisticated ideas, which may be wrong, but at least requires intelligence to
Yeah. They
understand.
have a lot of books.
Yeah, but a lot of leftist intellectuals, more
Yeah.
than on the right.
Yeah.
Um, Something like um, uh, then on the right we have like libertarianism, which is pretty complicated to actually understand, and has never been very successful among the masses. And libertarians have the highest IQs
Hmm.
of the major political groups, and that combination of economically free market beliefs and socially liberal beliefs, that's the highest IQ combination. Uh, and then something like Burkean conservatism, which is considered the most like sophisticated defense of conservatism in political philosophy, which says that uh, because we can't anticipate the effects of social engineering, we should um, uh, change should be incremental, so there's time to adjust, and some sophisticated uh,
Hmm.
theory, which very few people even know about. Although in philosophy, this is considered the most sophisticated kind of conservatism, which is not
Hmm.
popular, uh, not popular at all. My perspective would be more Nietzschean, so acknowledging that value is subjective, not prescribed to us by God or nature or any other force, and that it's up to
Hmm.
us to create value and um, and to select our own challenges.
Has there been a proper implementation? And this is, I know this is a technically a stupid question. Has there been a broad or like a, yeah, an application of Nietzscheanism that's stabilized? Like either like as a political or as like as the binding interaction of a group.
It's So Nietzsche himself would have praised certain errors of history, right? Like the Old Testament Jews or the Romans of antiquity. Those are societies that he approved of, but Nietzscheanism, in the sense that they're of widespread understanding of his basic observations and principles. Um, no, I don't think that would be possible. I mean, he himself recognized that his ideas would not be understood by everybody. And in fact, that's part of his philosophy, is that recognition that
Hmm.
this a certain level of understanding is not going to be for everybody,
Well,
and
not
that's
just
not something.
understanding, but practice. Like, well, how do you practice that? It's very
Yeah.
isolating. And this is a very shallow interpretation of Nietzsche. I'm aware, but it's very isolating. It
Well,
doesn't,
I don't
it's
see
not
any
about social cohesion. It's very explicitly anti-feminine, which is kind of like the modality of,
I don't see a conflict between the Nietzschean perspective and collective action, the pursuit of collective projects. Uh,
okay. Social cohesion is not in opposition to a Nietzschean framework.
no, properly realized, I don't think so. Yeah.
Hmm.
Uh, and he is, as far as I can tell, had nothing against group action, which depends on cohesion within the group, as long as um,
Hmm.
it's being put to it's being expressed in the right way, what he would
Well,
view
in
as
the
the
right
right
way
way.
or towards the right ends, and what would the ends be?
So it's well, my interpretation of the philosophy is um, the ends. We have the freedom to choose our ends, which is one of his insights, is that there's nothing that we have to do. And it's
Hmm.
the war that justifies the cause, not the cause that justifies the war,
Hmm.
on Nietzsche's view.
Hmm.
Uh, and as that is not inconsistent with having a cohesive society. Not at all. And for the sake of the war, there should be. Now,
Hmm.
I should say, war doesn't mean you should go around murdering
Jihad.
everybody.
Yeah.
Right. That was definitely not Nietzsche's view and not my view. But there certainly, um, we've gone in the direction of far too much sensitivity, and
Hmm.
I would certainly want to back away from that.
Hmm. What is your? I guess there's things that are happening currently that you're advised not to speak to, but intellectually speaking, what does this year hold for you? And you have your Substack and also a website. What are you putting your attention into insofar as offering for the general public?
I I recently started a Substack, Nathan Cofnas's newsletter, and Cofnas.com. I published two uh, two posts so far. I don't put out a lot of content regularly. I spend a lot
You
of
you only have
time.
two posts. They pack such a punch. It felt like much more than two.
Well, that's kind of you to say. I don't do a lot of hot takes. I don't
Mhm.
even tweet every day. Um, I think about, I write about things that I've been thinking about for a while, usually that are connected in some way to my work in the philosophy of biology.
Hmm.
So um, I wrote the first post, Why We Need to Talk About the Right Stupidity Problem. The second was A Guide for the Hereditarian Revolution.
Hmm.
Uh, I was uh, pleased that there was some response to them. They generated some discussion, and I will continue publishing on Substack uh,
Do
every
you have an
month or
idea of
two.
where you're headed, or I
Uh,
guess this is pretty infrequent, so I guess the idea will come and then you'll do
so
it. I just
yeah,
wonder if you
I
have a
have a
plan.
few things lined up.
Yeah.
Next one will most likely be on the connection between intelligence and moral worth. So I had a debate about this with Noah Carl and Charles Murray, who say that it's kind of unclear what, in my view, what they were saying, but that there was very little relationship between intelligence and moral worth, or even none at all. So I examined what that means. Uh, what is moral worth? Why would there be a relation? Why would there be no relation? That will
Yeah.
probably be the next post. And
Well, I
then
mean
I've
that's like one of the questions about if we are to be realistic about just IQ. One of the fears or one of the incentives for the taboo around thinking of that is that we don't want to assign people different moral worth based on that, right?
that's the worry. So
Yeah.
anyway, I don't want to give it away.
Yeah, but are you
People,
without us spoiling it, should we worry?
uh,
Is this like
the
kind of
short
a
answer
Doctor
is
Strange Glove, like how I quit worrying and learned to accept race realism kind of thing? Is that?
yeah, more like that.
Hmm.
Uh, I mean, our what is what is valuable, and the ability to experience, to to contemplate, to produce something that also has value,
Hmm.
instrumental value.
To savor.
These
Yeah.
um, this all suggests that intelligence could have relevance to something of moral value.
Okay.
Um, and
To quality, not to speak of
so,
quality of life, but to quality
yeah.
itself.
Now, of course, then you would say, well, what about somebody with a very high IQ who did these things that we think are terrible? What about all the high IQ Nazis and serial killers? What's his name? Ed Kemper had an IQ of like 150 something,
Hmm.
the serial killer. Uh, yeah, it's not the only thing. It's just one thing.
Hmm.
So, and it's part of the equation.
Hmm.
So anyway, I'll address that. I have some uh, other ideas, and my big project now is on the evolution of morality and the rise of liberalism, explaining uh, why liberal values triumphed over possible alternatives. That's going to be a book which
Oh,
won't come
really?
out for a few years.
This is your
Uh,
scholarly monograph, or is this your?
yeah, it, more likely I would try to publish it with a non-academic press,
Mhm.
regular press. It's not really written in the academic style,
Is it
typical
written in the
academic.
Nietzschean? Is it a the Sprock
It's more like,
Cofnas?
well, it's like like more like the Substack than
Yeah, yeah.
stereotypical
Wow.
monograph.
Who's one of? I guess Nietzsche is one of your influences. Anybody in the modern kind of off the unheard of kind of thinkers or writers that really galvanize you or like animate your curiosity? Or,
Well, I've been influenced by all sorts of people. I started off uh, reading a lot of the ethologists, like Konrad Lorenz, Eibel Eibesfeld. So they studied animal behavior, applied principles of animal behavior to
what kind of
uh,
gists were they? I didn't quite hear that.
human ethologists,
Ethologists.
um, or Conrad Lawrence
Is
was.
that just what it sounds like? Just the
So they're
ethic.
the principles of behavior.
Okay.
So
Ethics.
they
Okay.
um, so they studied animals, like the instincts, the instinctual behaviors, and then applied those lessons to understanding human society. That was uh, an influence on me. Um, and I
Has that
spent
given you
three.
tools to survive cancellation?
Um, I think that probably is more responsible for my cancellation than for helping me defeat it. I spent 3 years studying with a philosopher of science, Nevin Seserdich, in Hong Kong.
Hmm.
Uh, he um, he writes about the nature of heritability, race,
Hmm.
IQ. So he was one of the figures who influenced me to become a philosopher of biology, as well as
Hmm.
another philosopher of biology, Elliot Sober, who doesn't write about race, but also um, made me aware of philosophical questions within biology and evolution.
Hmm.
And uh, but I've influenced by many people and uh, feedback on my own work from many people. That's shaped my thinking.
Well, we set this conversation up before you got in the hot seat, and we didn't talk about the hot seat. But with regard to the hot seat, I hope things work out for you, and that you get to weave this gauntlet that you've landed in, found yourself in.
Oh, thank you very much.
And I'll link to where you're found, but it's just nathankofnas.substack.com, right?
No,
No,
it's
it's not.
my website is nathankofnas.com, and my Substack is nkofnas.com.
Okay, in Cofnas. And your Twitter will be linked below. And you don't post every day for some reason.
I sometimes I post a couple times in a day, but usually I can go a few days without posting.
They get into it with I can't remember his name, but whoever was going after Sailor for extended period of like a 6 week row. Can't remember his name right now, but I think you were roped
Uh,
in, and that's how I found
what
you.
I was having maybe was it with Adam Rutherford or
No, it was the other
yeah, I
guy. He's
forget what's
kind of
his name. Yeah, I forget.
yeah,
Uh, Very strange
Rutherford.
guy. Apparently he's real. The guy who was
Rutherford.
no tangling with Sailor. Now I forget his
Yeah,
name too.
yeah.
Yeah,
He's, oh, Stancil.
yeah, Stancil.
Yeah, it's funny. Dr. Cofnas, thank you so much for your evening. Very fascinating ideas, and I look forward to your book. And I'm going to rope you back in when it's ready, because that's a lot about what I'm really interested in, about understanding the origins of morality and tying that to biological framework has got to be really useful and helpful in just understanding patterns and adapting accordingly.
Oh, thank you very much for having me on. It was good to talk to you.